The Rhine had protected Germanic tribes since before Rome gave the river its name. 1900 years of military history had confirmed a simple truth. No army crossed the Rhine against determined resistance without bridges, and bridges could be destroyed. Oberst Wilhelm Steinberg, chief engineer for l'Artillerie Corps, had committed this doctrine to memory during 3 years of defensive operations across Russia and France. Standing in his command post near Wesel on the evening of March 22, 1945, he reviewed defensive preparations with the confidence of a man who understood immutable laws of physics and warfare. "The river is 400 meters wide at our narrowest points," he briefed his staff, gesturing at maps marked with overlapping fields of fire. "Current flows at nearly 2 meters per second. Water temperature stands at 4 degrees Celsius. Survivability in the water measures in minutes, not hours." His calculations were meticulous. Allied forces would require pontoon bridges to move armor and heavy equipment across. Each bridge would take 12 to 18 hours to construct under ideal conditions, longer under artillery fire. German 88mm guns, registered on every viable crossing point, could destroy pontoon sections faster than enemy engineers could replace them. "They will attempt crossings at dawn," Steinberg concluded. "Assault boats first, establishing small bridgeheads. Then the bridging operations begin. We will have 36 to 48 hours to concentrate our mobile reserves and eliminate each bridgehead before their armor crosses." The mathematics seemed irrefutable. Wehrmacht doctrine, refined through campaigns from Poland to Normandy, understood river crossings as sequential, time-consuming operations with predictable phases. Suppress defenders, send infantry across in waves, establish foothold, begin bridge construction, reinforce gradually. Each phase created vulnerabilities defenders could exploit. Field Marshal Albert Kesselring's orders to Rhine commanders reflected this certainty. "The enemy will require a minimum of 2 days to establish viable bridgeheads after initial assault. This window provides sufficient time for counterattack with armored reserves." German defensive preparations appeared formidable. Since September 1944, over 200,000 laborers had constructed 3,000 concrete bunkers and gun positions along the Rhine's eastern bank. Artillery observation posts provided overlapping coverage of the entire river frontage. Every bridge, railroad and highway alike, had been methodically demolished by German engineers, their shattered spans visible above the waterline as testament to defensive thoroughness. Before we continue, click that subscribe button, like this video, and let me know in the comments where you're watching from. It brings me great joy knowing that these war stories and lessons get to people all over the world. Your support helps us bring more thrilling war stories, and trust me, you won't want to miss them. Now, let's get back to the story. Major Hans-Georg Model, son of Field Marshal Walter Model, and serving with the 1st Parachute Army, recorded his assessment in a diary entry dated March 20th. The Americans mass on the opposite shore, but they face the same obstacle that stopped the French in 1795, Napoleon's marshals in 1813, and every invader throughout history. The Rhine demands respect. It cannot be rushed. It cannot be bypassed. One must build bridges or fail. What Model and every Wehrmacht officer believed they understood, what 2 millennia of military precedent had taught them, was that geography imposed non-negotiable constraints on warfare. Rivers were barriers. Crossing required engineering. Engineering required time. Time favored defenders. The fundamental assumption underlying every German defensive calculation was elegant in its simplicity. The laws of river warfare were fixed, knowable, and universal. They were about to discover that American industrial capacity had rewritten those laws entirely. Oberstleutnant Friedrich Wenzel had compiled 6 months of intelligence reports on Allied amphibious capabilities by March 1945. The DUKW, designated Schwimmwagen in German documents, appeared exactly 3 times in his 200-page assessment. Each mention dismissed the vehicles as specialized coastal landing craft, with no tactical relevance to river warfare. American excess, Wenzel noted in his February summary. They build ice cream ships and floating trucks when they should build tanks. This is not serious military thinking. The dismissal was systematic. Reports from Sicily mentioned boat trucks used for beach logistics. Observations from Normandy described amphibious cargo vehicles shuttling supplies from ships to shore. Italian theater intelligence classified them among naval support equipment. Not once did Wehrmacht analysis consider the DUKW relevant to crossing the Rhine. German estimates placed total DUKW numbers at 50 to 100 vehicles across the entire European theater. Curiosities of American industrial indulgence, like their insistence on hot showers and daily mail delivery. The reality was staggering. By March 1945, over 2,000 DUKWs operated in Europe. The U.S. Army had organized them into specialized amphibious truck companies, each with 50 vehicles and trained crews. British forces operated 2,000 additional units received through Lend-Lease. Canadian formations fielded 800 more with cold-weather modifications. The DUKW's origin story embodied everything German military tradition found incomprehensible about American warfare. In April 1942, a Coast Guard patrol boat ran aground on a sandbar off Provincetown, Massachusetts. Conventional trucks couldn't reach it through surf and sand. Palmer Putnam, working for the Office of Scientific Research and Development, saw not a minor incident but an engineering problem requiring industrial solution. Partnering with yacht designer Rod Stevens Jr. and engineer Dennis Puleston, Putnam envisioned a vehicle that could transition seamlessly from water to land. When Ford Motor Company declined the project as impossible within required time frames, General Motors Corporation accepted the challenge on April 23, 1942. 38 days later, the first prototype rolled out of GMC's Pontiac, Michigan facility. The engineering was pragmatic rather than elegant. A standard GMC 2.5-ton truck chassis, a watertight hull designed by yacht architects, a 25-inch propeller driven through the transmission, Frank Spear's revolutionary central tire inflation system allowing drivers to adjust pressure while moving, 10 psi for sand traction, 45 psi for highway efficiency. No sophisticated over-engineering, no perfectionist delays, just functional design executed at industrial scale. General Jacob Devers observed the June 1942 demonstration and immediately ordered 2,000 units. By war's end, GMC manufactured 21,147 DUKWs at peak rates of $525 per month. Each cost $10,150, roughly 7 Jeeps, and required 6,000 production hours versus the 300,000 hours German engineers estimated for their experimental LWS amphibious vehicle. The contrast revealed fundamentally different warfare philosophies. German doctrine valued craftsmanship, technical superiority, and perfection. American industry valued quantity, standardization, and adequate performance deployed at overwhelming scale. Wehrmacht intelligence officers examining captured DUKWs after Normandy filed reports noting the vehicle's crude construction, simple mechanics, and typical American preference for mass production over quality. One analysis concluded, adequate for uncontested beach operations, unsuitable for combat conditions. On the evening of March 23, 1945, hundreds of those unsuitable vehicles sat concealed within 5 miles of the Rhine, their crews having practiced river crossings for months on the Meuse and Maas rivers, operations German intelligence never detected. The catastrophe wasn't approaching. It had already been manufactured, shipped, and positioned. Germany simply hadn't noticed. If you enjoy dramatic, jaw-dropping stories, subscribe to WW2 Archives Declassified. Let's grow this channel to 1,000 subscribers. At 1700 hours, on March 23, 1945, the greatest artillery bombardment of the Rhine campaign commenced. Over 4,000 Allied guns, from 25-pounders to 240mm howitzers, unleashed a 4-hour barrage that turned the eastern bank into a landscape of fire and steel. German observers reported the ground itself seemed to liquefy under thousands of shells per minute. Gefreiter Heinrich Müller, manning an observation post near Wesel, attempted counting muzzle flashes across the river. I stopped at 500. It was like staring at a solid wall of flame stretching endlessly north and south. The noise wasn't explosions anymore, just one continuous roar that made thought impossible. At 2100 hours, under cover of darkness and artillery, the first DUKWs entered the Rhine. The 51st Highland Division led the assault. 7th Battalion Black Watch loaded into American-crewed amphibious trucks. Each DUKW carried 12 fully equipped soldiers, plus its 2-man crew. Navigation lights, shielded to be visible only from behind, marked entry and exit points on both banks. Sergeant Robert McPherson of the Black Watch described the crossing. The ducks slid into the water and just kept going. We were driving, then we were floating, and the driver never stopped steering. It felt wrong. Trucks don't float. Rivers don't have roads. But we were halfway across before by 0200 hours on March 24th. German command posts along the Rhine were receiving reports that violated every principle of river warfare doctrine. Enemy infantry reported 800 meters inland from riverbank. No bridgehead established. No crossing point identified. L-30 Corps, 0213 hours. Request artillery fire on enemy concentration coordinates, 4712. Correction, enemy forces no longer at those coordinates, now appearing at 481. 84th Infantry Division, 0237 hours. Unable to locate main crossing site, enemy troops appearing simultaneously across 15-kilometer front. 1st Parachute Army, 0304 hours. Oberst Steinberg, the engineer who had calculated precise timelines for bridge construction and counterattack windows, stared at reconnaissance reports with growing incomprehension. There were no pontoon bridges under construction, no vulnerable engineering operations to target, no fixed bridgeheads to contain and eliminate. Allied troops were simply appearing on the eastern bank, supplied, reinforced, and moving inland. At 0600 hours, Field Marshal Kesselring authorized armored counterattacks by 47th Panzer Corps. The doctrine was clear: identify the bridgehead, concentrate forces, drive attackers back into the river before they could consolidate positions. The counterattacks failed immediately. There was no bridgehead to attack. Hauptmann Josef Kramer, commanding a company of Panther tanks near Bislik, reported the impossibility. We advanced to coordinates where enemy infantry was reported, found scattered forces, engaged briefly. They withdrew, received new orders, enemy concentration 3 kilometers north, arrived to find they had moved again. It's like fighting smoke. They have no fixed position to defend because they have no crossing point to protect. By 0800 hours, the scale became visible in daylight. Hundreds of DUKWs crossed the Rhine in continuous flow, not shuttling back and forth like assault boats, but driving straight across, depositing troops and supplies, and returning for more loads. No traffic jams at crossing points, no engineering bottlenecks, no vulnerable bridge spans. The 17th Airborne Division, dropped beyond the Rhine at 1,000 hours, was supposed to operate isolated until ground forces could bridge the river days later. Instead, DUKWs reached airborne positions within 4 hours, delivering ammunition, evacuating wounded, and establishing supply lines that conventional doctrine said were impossible. Lieutenant Colonel William Thompson of the 458th Amphibious Truck Company described the operation clinically. "We weren't assaulting the Rhine. We were ignoring it. Ammunition forward, wounded back, constant circulation. The river was just another road, a wet one." German artillery, registered on fixed crossing points, fired at empty water. Counterattack forces, organized to eliminate bridgeheads, found nothing to attack. Doctrine called for containing enemy forces at the riverbank. Enemy forces were already 10 kilometers inland. By noon on March 24th, over 14,000 Allied troops had crossed the Rhine, not through bridges, not by establishing vulnerable footholds. By driving across in vehicles German intelligence had dismissed as beach equipment. Oberst Steinberg's final headquarters entry, dated March 24, 1600 hours, was discovered in captured documents. "We prepared to defend against river crossing operations. The enemy is conducting logistics operations. Our doctrine has no answer for this. The Rhine has ceased to function as a barrier." The river hadn't been conquered. It had been made irrelevant. The numbers told a story German military tradition could not comprehend. By March 1945, American factories had produced 21,147 DUKWs. Peak production reached 525 vehicles per month. Each required approximately 6,000 labor hours and cost $10,750. Total program expenditure, $227 million. Germany's comparable program, the Landwasserschlepper, LWS, a sophisticated amphibious tractor, produced 21 vehicles total. Each required an estimated 300,000 engineering hours. The program consumed resources equivalent to manufacturing 150 tanks, while delivering fewer amphibious vehicles than a single American amphibious truck company possessed. The contrast revealed warfare's fundamental transformation. Technical superiority had become irrelevant when confronted with adequate performance deployed at industrial scale. General Günther Blumentritt, Chief of Staff to Field Marshal von Rundstedt, addressed this reality in post-war interrogations. "We knew the Americans could outproduce us. We did not understand they could outimagine us. They built 20,000 trucks that swim. We built 21 specialized vehicles. They standardized simple solutions. We perfected complex ones. They won." The Rhine crossing demonstrated industrial asymmetry as decisive weapon. American forces didn't need superior tactics or better soldiers. They needed sufficient capability multiplied by overwhelming numbers. The DUKW wasn't elegant. It was adequate. and there were 2,000 of them on the Rhine alone. Standardization proved equally devastating. Every DUKW used identical GMC components. Parts were interchangeable. Maintenance required no specialized training. Crews could be trained in weeks rather than months. When vehicles broke down, they were repaired with parts from any other DUKW or standard GMC truck. German LWS vehicles required custom components, specialized mechanics, and training programs that consumed months. Lose one vehicle, lose irreplaceable capability. Major Hans-Georg Modell's diary, discovered after his April surrender, included a final entry dated March 28th. The war was not lost on the Rhine. It was lost in American factories years before we saw these vehicles. We fought with craftsmanship against capacity, skill against scale. The outcome was inevitable once their production began. The Rhine crossing accelerated Germany's collapse by an estimated 3 to 4 weeks. Allied forces that would have spent days constructing vulnerable bridges were already 30 kilometers beyond the river by March 26th. The Ruhr industrial region, Germany's last functioning manufacturing base, was encircled within 10 days. By April 1945, as German resistance disintegrated, DUKWs transitioned to humanitarian operations. The same vehicles that crossed the Rhine under fire now evacuated displaced civilians, delivered food to starving populations, and transported refugees across rivers whose bridges had been destroyed. The DUKW, born from a Coast Guard boat running aground off Massachusetts, had helped destroy the Third Reich not through revolutionary technology, but through simple engineering, multiplied by American industrial will. In the end, Germany's sacred river barrier fell not to superior generalship or tactical brilliance, but to a factory in Pontiac, Michigan, that built 525 swimming trucks every month for 3 years. The factory had won the war. Germany had simply failed to understand what modern warfare had become. The Rhine River still flows through Germany, 1,230 kilometers from the Swiss Alps to the North Sea. Its width remains formidable. Its currents still run swift and cold. The geography that protected Germanic tribes from Roman legions for 2 millennia has not changed. What changed was the nature of warfare itself. The Rhine wasn't defeated on March 23, 1945. It was made obsolete, not by superior tactics or overwhelming force, but by industrial capacity applied to a problem German doctrine believed insoluble. 2,000 amphibious trucks transformed an eternal barrier into a wet road requiring slightly lower tire pressure. This represented warfare's fundamental transformation from art to industry, from tactical brilliance to production capacity, from geographic advantage to logistical imagination. For centuries, military success depended on geography, generalship, and soldier quality. Rivers were barriers, mountains were obstacles, oceans were moats. Commanders who understood terrain and could maneuver forces skillfully within geographic constraints won battles. The DUKW crossing demonstrated that industrial nations could simply manufacture solutions to geographic problems. Rivers became irrelevant when factories could produce thousands of vehicles that drove across them. Distance became meaningless when standardized trucks could be built faster than enemies could destroy them. Wehrmacht officers, trained in a military tradition valuing tactical excellence and operational artistry, never conceived that warfare had become primarily an industrial equation. They calculated crossing times, bridge construction rates, and defensive firing arcs. They never calculated whether the enemy might simply bypass the entire problem through mass production. General Blumentritt articulated this conceptual defeat. We prepared to fight the war we understood: movement, position, counterattack. They fought the war their economy enabled: production, logistics, overwhelming material presence. We never had a chance once their factories reached full capacity. The Rhine crossing's true significance wasn't tactical or operational. It was philosophical. It marked the moment when geographic barriers, the foundation of military defense throughout human history, ceased to constrain nations with sufficient industrial capacity. A German general staff officer, interrogated in May 1945, provided the clearest epitaph for traditional warfare. You ask when Germany lost the war. We lost it in 1942 when American factories began producing 500 amphibious trucks monthly, and we produced 21 total. We lost it when they standardized adequate solutions while we perfected complex ones. We lost it when warfare became industrial rather than military. The Rhine was merely where we discovered what had already been decided. The war ended 6 weeks after the Rhine crossing. Germany surrendered not because its soldiers stopped fighting, but because industrial asymmetry had rendered continued resistance meaningless. The final irony: the DUKW, designed in 38 days to rescue a grounded Coast Guard boat, had helped destroy a military tradition refined over centuries. Simple engineering, mass-produced, had defeated tactical mastery. The Rhine still flows, but it no longer protects anyone from nations that build their victories in factories. Don't just watch, sir. Archives. Declassified hit 1,000 subscribers.